Good evening and welcome to the Standing Resolution, the show where we take the ideas you argue about at dinner and make them somebody else's problem. Tonight's question is one that touches just about every crossroads a person faces. Where do you plant yourself, and how much does the size of the garden actually matter? The resolution before us this evening is this: better a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big one. Simple enough words, but tucked inside them is a genuinely consequential argument about ambition, identity, belonging, and what we actually mean when we say someone has made it. Do you want to be the person who dominates a smaller stage, or the one who tests themselves against the widest possible competition, even if that means spending a good long while at the bottom looking up? Now, before we go any further, one important note about how we do things here. Each of our debaters was assigned their position. They did not choose their side, we chose it for them. So what you're about to hear is the best possible case for each argument made by someone who was handed it cold. That, frankly, is where the real skill lies. One side will argue the result.
Let's start with what we actually mean when we say better. Not richer, not more famous, not higher on some abstract leaderboard. Better as in a life more fully lived, a person more genuinely effective, an identity that is coherent and grounded rather than perpetually provisional. That's the standard I'm holding this resolution to, and I think it wins on every count. Here is the first principles case. Human beings do not flourish in the abstract. We flourish in relation to something, to a community, to a problem we can actually grip, to feedback that tells us whether we're succeeding or failing. The big pond, for all its glamour, is a place where most of that feedback disappears into noise. You are one of thousands. Your contributions diffuse. Your sense of whether you matter becomes almost impossible to calibrate. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a fundamental disruption to the mechanism by which people grow. Now consider the small pond. You are visible. Your decisions have consequences you can trace. When you improve, the pond improves. When you fail, you feel it and you learn from it. This is the tight feedback loop that actually produces mastery. It's why Agria.
Holly's makes it sound very cozy, and I want to take that seriously because the case for the small pond is genuinely appealing. Visibility, feedback, legible contribution, those are real goods, I don't dismiss them. But here is what that argument quietly assumes, that the pond you happen to be in is the right size for you, and that assumption does an enormous amount of hidden work. History is littered with people who were the biggest fish in waters that simply did not deserve them. The brilliant administrator who ran a provincial office and never knew what she might have built at scale. The engineer who became indispensable to a company that was solving the wrong problem. Mastery in a small pond does not mean you have found your ceiling. It may just mean you have found a comfortable lid. There is something else the small pond does that we rarely name honestly. It protects you, and protection over time has a cost. When you are the big fish, the smaller fish accommodate you. The feedback loop Holly's praises has a flaw built into it. It runs through people who depend on you, who defer to you, who have every incentive to tell you things are going well. That is not calibration.
Both sides have made their opening case, and I have to say, the water is already getting choppy. Holly says the small pond is where real growth lives. Mordecai says comfort and growth are not the same thing. Stick around, because in just a moment the rebuttals arrive, and both of our debaters are about to answer for exactly what they just said. Welcome back, I'm Justice Vale, and you're watching The Standing Resolution. Tonight we're asking whether it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big one. We've heard the opening arguments, now our debaters get to answer for them. Rebuttals, let's go.
Mordecai raised 2 objections, and I want to meet them both directly, because they deserve it. First, the hidden assumption that the small pond might just be a comfortable lid. That's a real risk. I'll grant it. But notice what the objection proves. It proves that you should choose your pond wisely, not that you should abandon the pond framework altogether. The answer to picking the wrong small pond is to pick a better one, not to dissolve yourself into an ocean where your actual contribution becomes invisible. The problem Mordecai describes is a problem of discernment, not a problem with the resolution. Second, and this is the one I really want to push back on, the claim that small pond feedback is corrupted because the smaller fish defer to you. This gets the dynamic almost exactly backwards. In a small pond, your failures are public and immediate. There is nowhere to hide. The whole community sees when the school's best teacher loses a class, when the local founder ships a bad product. Deference is a luxury of bureaucracy, and bureaucracy lives in the big pond, not the small one. It is precisely in large institutions where people learn to manage upward, to insulate themselves.
Holly says the answer to a bad small pond is simply to pick a better one. I appreciate the tidy fix, but let's sit with it for a moment. How do you know from inside the small pond whether you have chosen well or merely chosen comfortably? The very visibility Holly's praises is also a kind of pressure, social, relational, deeply local. It takes real courage to leave a place where you are admired, and the longer you stay, the harder that becomes. The small pond does not just shelter you. Over time, it trains you to need the shelter. On the deference point, I think Holly's is describing one version of the small pond, the idealized one. But think about what actually happens in tight communities where one person holds disproportionate standing. Dissent becomes costly. People work around the big fish rather than confronting them. That is not a bureaucratic pathology exclusive to large institutions. It is a human one, and it runs just as deep in small towns, small firms, and small departments as anywhere else. Holly's also drew a distinction between anonymity and honest challenge, and I want to hold on to that because it is actually my point, not a rebuttal of it. The big pond does not.
Holly's, you've argued that the small pond gives you clearer, more honest feedback because your failures are visible and immediate. But you also said the fix for a bad small pond is simply to pick a better one. Here's my question. If the feedback in a small pond is truly that honest and unsparing, why would anyone ever need to leave? What does it say about that feedback loop if people routinely stay too long?
That is a genuinely sharp question, and I want to answer it honestly rather than dodge it. People stay too long in comfortable situations for the same reason they stay in comfortable anything, because leaving is hard, and because the costs of staying are often invisible until they compound. That is not an indictment of honest feedback. It is an observation about human psychology. The feedback can be accurate and still be uncomfortable to act on. But here is what I think the question actually reveals. The problem is never that the small pond is too clear-eyed. The problem is that people sometimes choose the warmth of being seen over the discipline of what being seen requires. That is a failure of will, not a failure of the pond. The honest feedback loop is the feature. What you do with it is up to you. And that, I would argue, is exactly as it should be.
Mordecai, you've argued that recognition earned in the big pond is unambiguous. Nobody handed it to you out of deference. But most people who enter large competitive arenas never reach that moment of unambiguous recognition. They spend years as the small fish and then simply exit, quieter than when they arrived. What do you say to them? Was the current worth swimming against if it never actually revealed anything?
That is the question I owe an honest answer to, and I won't pretend it's a comfortable one. Some people swim hard against the current and never break through. That is real, and I will not dress it up. But I want to ask what we are actually measuring when we call that a loss. Did they learn things about themselves they could not have learned in still water? Did they work alongside people who genuinely pushed them? Did they carry that sharpening back into whatever came next? The big pond does not promise a destination. It promises a different kind of formation, and formation has value even when the prize never arrives. The small pond promises visibility, but visibility in a place that never truly tested you is a kind of comfortable fiction. I would rather someone discover their honest limits than spend a lifetime celebrated for never finding them.
Up next is the moment this show was built for, the Steelman Round, where Hollies and Mordecai each have to stand up and make the strongest possible case for the side they've been fighting against all night. No deflection, no hedging. You want to see whether they can do it and what it costs them. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Standing Resolution. I'm Justice Vale, and we are asking tonight whether it is better to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big one. Now comes the round that separates the debaters from the advocates, the Steelman. Each side argues the other. Let's see what they've got.
Here is the strongest case against my own position, and I want to give it everything it deserves. Big Pond does something that no small pond can replicate. It exposes you to genuine excellence at scale. When you are surrounded by people who are truly, undeniably better than you at the thing you care about most, something happens that comfort cannot produce. Your assumptions get dismantled. Your techniques get refined under pressure you did not choose and cannot control. You discover not just what you can do, but what you actually are when the external scaffolding of local esteem is stripped away. That is a kind of self-knowledge that is hard-won, and for that reason, unshakable. And the people who come out the other side of that crucible carry something with them that the big fish in the small pond simply never had to earn. They know their strength was tested against the best available standard. That is not nothing. That is, arguably, everything. I take that seriously. I genuinely do. But here is where I land, having sat with it. That argument proves the value of challenge. It does not prove that the big pond is the only place challenge lives. The small pond, chosen well in.
Here is the best case for the resolution, and I want to mean it. There is a kind of clarity that only comes from mattering, not from being important in the abstract, not from proximity to greatness, but from standing in a place where your choices have traceable consequences and the people around you feel what you do. That is not a small thing. That is the condition under which most genuine wisdom is actually built. The teacher who shapes a community over decades, the local doctor who knows the whole person and not just the chart, the founder who can see from one end of the organization to the other, these people are not settling. They are inhabiting the full bandwidth of a human life. They know the names, they see the results. They are not waiting to matter, they already do. And there is a kind of integrity in that, a coherence between effort and outcome that the big pond can genuinely struggle to provide. The resolution is pointing at something real. That scale is not the same as significance, and that a life felt fully in a bounded place may be richer than a life spent largely invisible in an unbounded one. I have sat with that seriously, and I think it earns its place at the...
Both sides just argued the other's case and did it well enough that you might be wondering who actually believes what anymore. Closing arguments are next, and that is exactly where it gets decided. Each debater gets one last shot to make you choose their side. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I'm Justice Vale, and this is the standing resolution. We've heard the opens, the rebuttals, the cross-examination, and tonight we even watched each debater argue the other's case with genuine conviction. Now comes the last word. Closing arguments. Let's find out where both sides finally plant their flag.
Here is what this debate has really been about. Not ponds, not fish, but the difference between a life that is felt and a life that is deferred. Mordecai made the case for the big pond beautifully, and I want to honor it. The current is real, the sharpening is real, but we have both been circling the same uncomfortable truth all night, and I want to say it plainly now. Most people who enter the big pond never reach the moment of unambiguous recognition Mordecai described. They wait, they manage, they survive. And they call that growth because the alternative is admitting the current swept them past their chance to matter. The small pond is not a consolation. It is a different theory of what a good life actually requires. It requires that your effort be traceable, that your failures be real, that the people around you are changed by what you do. That is not a lower standard. That is the standard. Scale is seductive because it promises that bigger means truer. But significance is not a function of audience size. It is a function of depth, of consequence, of whether the work you did left a mark you can actually see. The big fish in the small pond knows the answer to that question.
Holly's closed beautifully, a life that is felt, not deferred. I understand the pull of that, I have felt it myself. But here is the thing about deferral. Holly's treats it as a failure of the big pond when it is actually a feature of genuine ambition. Every worthwhile thing takes longer than we want. The surgeon who spent years invisible in a great hospital, the writer who spent a decade reading better writers than herself, the engineer who was, for a long time, the least capable person in the room. They were not waiting. They were being changed by something they could not have found at home. Holly says most people in the big pond never reach the moment of unambiguous recognition. That may be true, but most people in the small pond never discover whether they deserved more. And I think that second ignorance is the costlier one. We have talked all night about feedback and formation and what a life well lived actually requires. Here is my answer. It requires that at some point you stood somewhere that did not need you, did not adjust for you, did not soften the standard on your behalf, and you found out what you were made of anyway. The small pond can tell you who you are there.
And that is where we leave it tonight. Hollis Vega argued that the small pond is not a compromise. It is a complete life, one where your work leaves a mark you can actually trace. Mordecai Quill argued that you cannot know what you are made of until something genuinely difficult has had a chance to find out for you. Two serious cases. Two debaters who each, at one point tonight, argued the other's side with enough conviction that I genuinely lost track of who was supposed to be winning. That, frankly, is the best thing that can happen on this show. I won't tell you who prevailed. That is your job. Think about the last time you chose the comfortable room or the hard one and whether you'd make the same call again. Then vote. The resolution stands or falls based on what you decide. And while you're thinking it over, we would love to know what you want us to argue next. Head to Paxelle.tv and cast your vote for the next resolution. We read every single one. One thing before you go. The standing resolution features AI personas built to debate. The positions you heard tonight were assigned, not chosen, and nothing said here should be taken as a genuine belief held by anyone.